Good afternoon, good afternoon, good afternoon. Hope everybody is doing fine. Oops. While we're waiting for everybody to come in, if you would look at primary productivity, that's what we're going to be looking at today. I have some activities for you to do, but first we're going to look at two videos and then I'll show you what to do with the two activities that are in the holding bay for you. All right. Let's see, before I do that, all right. Just a reminder that next Tuesday, a week from today, we have you have your 9-week exam. And again, it will be in the AP classroom with questions similar to those that you've been working on as far as the MCQs are concerned. And you have not had FRQs in the AP classroom, but I have been giving you some to practice with. So you'll run it. So it's a mixture of both FRQs and MCQs. So that's next week, Tuesday, a 9-week exam. All right, I think almost everybody's here. So again, we are looking at what is productivity. Okay, so we've already done Mr. Sneed's, and some of you have done your AP classroom, and this is the definition you need to be thinking about right here as far as what we're talking about by primary productivity. So I have two videos. One is for ocean productivity specifically, and the other goes with the activity that you have been assigned to do. All right, so we're going to look at the ocean one first.
We've had a problem here. This is Houston. Say again, please. Houston, we've had a problem.
Houston, no problems today. Today we're going to talk about ocean productivity. So this is our living things that we talked about last time. How do they produce, right? Not like reproduce, but production. So let's talk about this. What's this a term here? Something called primary productivity. This is it is the amount of carbon available for creatures to survive. This is usually caused by photosynthesis. And as we talked about this, in the ocean, the primary the primary creatures that do these are the phytoplankton. Because they are the primary, most of the bottom, if you will, food chain, which we'll talk about next, starts with these creatures right here, and everybody eats them, who eats them, who eats them, who eats them.
All right, so I'm pausing that because that's a vocabulary word, phytoplankton. And there's two types of plankton. There's zooplankton. So phyto are the plants, and they are the producers. They're the ones that photosynthesize. So keep that vocabulary word in your mind as far as the bottom or the base of the food chain in this case, because all food chains start with the producers, which are the plants. In the ocean, it's the phytoplankton.
Kind of a thing. So let's think about this primary productivity and what do you need to make this happen? So what are the two factors that you need to make the phytoplankton do well? Turns out you need Well, two factors. What are the two factors? Number one, you need the sun. Without the sunlight, game over. You need lots of sun, right? Sun matters. And the other thing that you need is nutrients. You know, in the ecosystems of land, if you've got a desert, lots of sun, but the soil isn't very good. All right, but in the ocean, you need good, there's no soil, so to speak, because that's at the bottom, and we need it to sort of float up. So the nutrients are found at the bottom of the ocean. All right, so to make productivity, to make lots of phytoplankton, which makes the basis for the entire aquatic organisms to survive, you've got to have a combination of sunlight and nutrients. So you might ask the question, where do you find the richest soil, the best waters for living things to happen? Well, let's talk about the different regions of the earth and look at them and ask the question, do they have enough sunlight? When do they have enough sunlight? Are they getting their nutrients? So let's first talk about the tropical oceans. Now clearly they have a lot of sun, but because of the thermocline, recall that, there's not a lot of mixing, so there's not a lot of ways for the nutrients from the bottom to get to the top. So interestingly enough, the tropical oceans are the deserts. There's not a lot of life because there's no food. There's no phytoplankton. The thermocline is so strong that it doesn't allow mixing to happen. All right, let's change gears. Let's look at the polar oceans. Now clearly the polar oceans are often covered in ice. But when they're not covered in ice, there is a time of year, you know this probably, at certain times of the year it's dark, no sun. But in other times of the year you've got sunlight extraordinaire. So sun in the summer, now say summer, it could be our winter if it's down in the southern hemisphere, right? So they get interesting things happen like this. So here's a graph of the plankton in the polar regions. Notice how it peaks in the summer. Makes sense, doesn't it, right? And there is no thermocline, all right, that's important, right? There's no thermocline in the cold polar oceans, but because of that, then there is no barrier for the nutrients to rise up and be eaten or used up by the phytoplankton. So this is why the polar oceans, they have something happen. Now the most interesting part of the world is what we call the temperate ocean. Now, the temperate oceans aren't, right by the equator. They're in between the equator and the polar regions. And if you look at the picture of the temperate oceans, it's complex. Look at that. You've got a phytoplankton with the peak, got the zooplankton coming down, and you can see the different times of sunshine, and there's different sparks or spikes, I guess is the word I'm looking for, because it turns out in the temperate oceans that you get two interesting things happening. In the winter, let me just say this, you basically have a spring bloom, and then you have a fall bloom. That's where you see the peaks right there. And what starts to happen is because as the oceans are going over and the temperature is starting to warm up of the oceans, then you get the turnover. If you can get the stuff from the bottom up, then there is something for them to eat. And this is crazy where this happens. A place that you might not think about, you might think it's polar, but off the coast of Alaska, it's temperate oceans. And the fishing there is amazing. Why is it amazing? Because especially in the spring, there's the spring bloom, all the phytoplankton eat, then the zooplankton, and then whales come to eat, and then seals and otters and fish and fish and fish. So the temperate ocean has these two big peaks that are called the spring and the fall bloom. But when you move back to, say, the summer, then you get a strong thermocline, because you see what you need is these changes in temperature to keep changing, and changing temperatures causes circulation of the ocean, which causes the goop from the bottom. That's what you want, the goop, to get up to the phytoplankton so they can eat, survive, grow, be eaten, be eaten, be eaten, be eaten, and eventually a whale gets it. So Houston, productivity, it's an interesting thing. In our last video in this particular level, we're going to talk about how they eat, right? We've talked about this is where the energy comes from, and that's going to go there next. But actually I forgot one thing. Hold on, back up. I forgot to talk about one more topic, and that's called biomass. Now biomass, mass of bio. This is the mass of all living things? Actually, their mass, their weight, right? If you weigh them, now we often talk about the biomass of the earth, right? And when we think about the biomass, I have biomass, right? My muscles here, my brain, my eyes, I have mass, you have mass, trees have mass. And often we talk about the earth biomass, but sometimes we talk about the marine biomass. So marine has to do with, of course, the oceans, right? So it turns out that the oceans are about 3% of all the biomass of the earth. Only 3. Is that crazy? 97% of the weight of the earth, of the weight of the living things, that's what it is, the weight of all the living things is on land. Only 3% is in the water. And one of the big reasons is that we don't have, let me think about how to say this. The plankton live and die quickly. But a tree, which is a primary producer in the real world, in the terrestrial land, he lives for hundreds of years potentially. And so his mass keeps going. But a phytoplankton is born, he lives, he dies, and this happens very, very quickly. So there's not a whole lot of like steady creatures that last for a long, long time in the ocean. Now some of the whales and things like that will live for a long time, but their primary source keeps being recirculated every year. And if you break that circulation, we're going to have a crisis of great proportions in our ocean. So the biomass matters. Anyways, funny, mass matters. Guys, next up, like I said, we're going to go back and we're going to talk about, lastly, about who eats who and how that works. We'll see you in class.
All right. So that one.
Okay, Houston, we've had a problem here.
Whoops.
This is Houston. Say again,
That's
please.
the next one, but that's not what we're watching. All right. So then you have, so that was basically for aquatic products. Whoops, stop talking.
Right
now. All right. In your Canvas, you have an assignment that says primary productivity factors. And we're looking at this pyramid, but the video goes with this, so we're going to look at that. And then once you finish looking at the video, you're going to answer this question. You're going to explain the factors that affect energy productivity. And you're going to talk about, so you need to give me a sentence. How does light affect it? What does temperature have to do with productivity? What do the nutrients, kind of like what he was explaining, the 2 factors that you need in the ocean for the phytoplankton. You're going to discuss what carbon dioxide has to do with productivities. All right, so we're going to watch. This is actually a link to the video, so if you click that, but I already have the video open, so I'm not clicking it. I'm just going to switch, and both of these videos are in your playlist, as well as the link here for this one.
And some of you might already guess where this energy is coming from. The surface of our planet is constantly being bombarded with light energy from the sun. And you might know that there's certain organisms on our planet that are capable of taking that light energy and then storing it as chemical energy. And those things, and there's many types, but the ones that we see most often in our day-to-day life are plants. And so let's imagine a plant here. And what it's doing is it's using that light energy in conjunction with water, typically from the soil that maybe it's getting through its roots, and carbon dioxide in the air. And it's using that light energy to actually stick, or you could say fix, the carbon to construct itself. And in its own tissue, it's storing that energy. And then if it were to break down that tissue, it can release that energy in various forms. Now, as it does this, you might also be familiar that these photosynthesizers, or these primary producers, or these autotrophs, they're also releasing molecular oxygen. Now, if we were to describe this in chemical terms or chemistry terms, we would describe this process of photosynthesis as taking carbon dioxide from the air in conjunction with water from the soil. And what's, I guess you could say, fueling all of this is light energy, usually from the sun. And what that is yielding is the tissue of the plant that is actually storing that energy is chemical energy in an organic form. And the primary way that this is done is through glucose, which is C6H12O6. I know what you're thinking. All plants don't taste sweet. Well, if you take chains of sugars and put them together, you get carbohydrates, and you adapt them a little bit, you get things like starches, and that's what most of the plant tissue is. So some variations of this, or variations of this linked together, but this is where the energy is stored. So energy stored in the actual plant tissue, and then of course it releases that molecular oxygen. And this is the process of photosynthesis. And even if you look at the word photosynthesis and what the parts of it mean, photo is referring to light, and synthesis is referring to putting something together, synthesizing something. So photosynthesis, you're using light to put together these, essentially fix the carbon together to store energy. Now, you might say, all right, that's nice. I'm storing the energy this way. How do I actually use the energy? And that's something that all of us are doing. All living systems have to do. And that process is respiration. And you could already guess what at least the chemical reaction for respiration will look like. You're going to start with our stored energy, our glucose, C6H12O6, in the presence of oxygen. And since we're respiring all the time, this is why we need to breathe oxygen. And this is going to yield carbon dioxide, and that's why we exhale more carbon dioxide than we inhale. It's also going to release water, and it's going to release, and this is the whole point of it, cellular energy. And in other videos that you'll see in a biology class, we'll talk about how this form of stored energy gets converted to other forms, and then how that's used by the various machinery and cells to actually live, to reproduce, to move in many cases. Now, an interesting question is, how do you measure how much photosynthesis is going on? How much primary productivity is going on? Well, one way to think about it is find an ecosystem and take a certain area of the surface of that ecosystem. And it could be a terrestrial ecosystem on land. It could be a marine ecosystem. And then say, for this area in a given period of time, oftentimes a year, how much stuff is growing? So this is the stuff that grows. And obviously, or it would seem that the more stuff that is growing, that the more photosynthesis that is taking place. And the way that they measure how much is growing, you could either measure it in terms of grams of biomass, so grams of biomass, and biomass is just a fancy way of saying the mass of biological stuff that's just growing on this area, and usually they'll take the water out so they get a consistent measurement. Or you can convert this to calories, and it's usually measured in thousands of calories, kilocalories. And when you see calories on a packaging food label, what most of us think of calories, those are actually kilocalories when we think about it in scientific terms. And I know what you're thinking. You're like, wait, mass and kilocalories, calories, that's just a form of energy. Well, those two things you can go between, because usually a certain type of biomass, a gram of a certain type of biomass, will have a certain amount of energy stored in it. Not energy that necessarily all animals could use or that we could use, but it does have energy in it. Now, when we talk about this primary productivity, you might already be thinking about, well, don't the plants need to use some of the energy that they are producing themselves to live? And my answer to you is, of course they need it. In fact, that's probably the most important reason why they need to photosynthesize, is because they need to do respiration in order for them to grow and metabolize and live and reproduce. And so when you see how much has been produced in a given area in a given year, you're actually seeing the net primary productivity. This is you could think about it, how much photosynthesis they did minus how much respiration they did. So if you think of how much photosynthesis they did as gross primary productivity, so that's the total amount of photosynthesis, and then you subtract out the amount of energy, chemical energy or cellular energy they needed for respiration, that would then give you the net primary productivity. And as I mentioned, just to make things a little bit tangible, if you took a very productive ecosystem, let's say something like a rainforest that I have here in the background, a very productive ecosystem like this, if you were to take, on average, a square meter of this, it produces in a year about 2,000 grams of biomass. So here we would say that the net primary productivity of this rainforest that you see in the background here would be approximately 2,000 grams per square meter per year. And if you wanted to think about this in terms of kilocalories, you just have to say, well, each gram of biomass is how many kilocalories, and it depends on the type of biomass. But let's say that we have 4 kilocalories per gram of biomass. So then we could also say that this net primary productivity is equal to 2,000 grams per square meter per year times 4 kilocalories per gram. The grams cancel out, and then you multiply 4 times 2,000. That's going to be 8,000 kilocalories per square meter per year. That would be the net primary productivity, because that's after the plants have been doing respiration. Now, how would you figure out gross primary productivity? Well, you're not going to be able to do it directly, but you can figure that out by figuring out the rate of respiration. If you took some plants in that ecosystem and then you put them in a dark room with no light, and then if you saw how much oxygen they are absorbing or they're having to use, then that gives you a sense of how much respiration they are doing. And there's ways that you could look at the ratios of the oxygens and the carbons to figure out exactly how much respiration is going on. And then if you know the net primary productivity and the rate of respiration, then you could figure out the gross primary productivity. But I will leave you there because these are really useful measurements. Well, one, it's really useful to think about where all of the energy that allows us to live comes from, but it's also useful for ecologists to think about how productive a system is, or what's making it more productive or less productive. And as we'll see, these numbers here, these are for sure on the high end of net primary productivity. If we were in a desert type of ecosystem, this number might be in the low hundreds, not in the 8,000 range.
Alrighty. Let's pause that before it goes into something. Not doing that. Not doing that.
I have 2 vessels of water. I start heating them with
Stop. Stop, stop, stop. All right. So we're not doing that one. All right. So I wanted you to, now that one was slightly more complicated than the first one, but you need to be familiar, and both of them use the term biomass. Again, vocabulary. I was looking at some of the FRQs. Folks, you need the more, some of you condense it into as few words as possible. That is not going to get you the points. You need to say it in as many words as possible, using all the vocabulary that you can. Okay, so terms like biomass, you need to know what is biomass and what does that have to do with energy. All right, so you have a question here that we are looking at the energy pyramid. So if I can enlarge this at all. Let me see if I can make this bigger somehow. Come on. No, it's not gonna let me. You probably can. But the base of a pyramid is the producer. The producers are always the plants. Okay, so they are where primary productivity starts. And notice over here, you've got your sun. That's always going to be part of your picture. All right, so you get 100% of the sun's energy is shining down on these primary producers. And then you have the organisms that eat the plants, and they are So everything that above plants is a consumer, but we've got three kinds of consumer. We have those that only eat plants. They are the primary consumers. Then you have those that eat the primary consumers. They are the secondary consumers. Then you have the tertiary consumers. They eat the secondary, and sometimes they eat the primary, and sometimes they also eat plants. Okay, but they are at the top. Those are the tertiary consumers. And then you have the organisms over here. All of these things are going to die at some point, and they are going to return nutrients back to the soil. So you need the decomposers. Those are little organisms that are going to attack the dead mass, the dead biomass, and return nutrients back to the soil so that these lovely little primary producers can grow some more. Okay, so all those nutrients that you've been talking about, some of you mentioned very nicely with your phosphates. We have phosphates in the bodies of organisms. They are returned back to the soil when those organisms die as well. Okay, so you see you have an arrow from every level going to back the decomposers, and bacteria and fungi are your decomposers. So every level contributes to the foods as a food source for bacteria and fungi, which are your decomposers. Once the decomposers feed, they return nutrients back to the soil. So that's how that cycle works. All right, so now what you want to do is write first thing you have to do, step one, write the equation for photosynthesis. So that's what he had in the video. You can click the link if you need to go back and see that. One, write the equation, because some of y'all don't read all the parts to the question and you lose points because you're not answering everything. Step one, write the equation for photosynthesis. Step two, explain how each of the following factors affect energy productivity. And you need to talk about it in terms of the equation you just wrote. So what does light have to do with photosynthesis? What does temperature have to do with photosynthesis? Where are the nutrients coming from? What does carbohydrate have to do with photosynthesis and productivity? Okay. Got a question. This one, okay, I will unlock it. Let me see. What's today? Today's the 23rd. Okay. Not a problem. That is fixed. All right, so it should be open now. It's open today. All right, so that's number one. And that's not real. It shouldn't take you too long to look at that one. Then you have another one to look at. Is it there? And I might have put that one. Somebody's already answered it. Circle of life. No, because Sean. Okay, didn't mean to click it there, but let's look at it from here. All right, you have a discussion question to look at. Circle of life. All right, circle of life means exactly what it is. You have a circular, so we've been talking about cycles. And so with this one, again, instead of looking at it like a pyramid, we're looking at it as a cycle. All right. So you are looking at the diagram, and it says discuss two factors about each cycle. So you have an outer cycle, and you have one that goes from here to there or from here to there. So actually you could look at it as 3 cycles. Technically, the one up top is the same as similar to the discussion with the one on the bottom. So you have the larger cycle again, and then the cycle that goes that travels from the decomposers to the producers and back to the decomposers, or you have the cycle that goes all the way around. So your question there is to discuss two. Discuss means don't just point them out. It means that you need two solid sentences discussing what's going on. How is matter and energy being cycled? All right, so this is all about cycling matter and energy, or another word for matter would be biomass. All right, so you got two questions that you can give your attention to for the rest of the class time. And if you have a question for me, please ask. If you finished that early and you haven't done your AP classroom, please make sure you've done that. Everybody did their FRQs, yay. I think maybe only one person. But y'all are doing good, real good, real good, real good. Let's stop sharing, doing attendance. Ask questions, ask questions, ask questions. Today's Tuesday. If for some reason you need to stay behind for tutorial, please take advantage of that. Oh, it's confused. And again, I ask that you use class time to do classwork, and then you won't have to be looking for things that are all right. I see some of you looking at things that are blocked. What's blocked? That video? If it's blocked from the link, try it from your playlist. And if it stays blocked, what I'll do is I'll just put up the last frame of the video for you so that you can see it on screen. That's what I'll do. Just give me 1 minute to do attendance. I thought you were present, but I guess not. Okay, let me just mark this one person absent, and I will put that picture up so that you can get the information, because you really just need the last, you don't need to watch the whole video. You just need to have that last scene visible. Okay, let me. Mm, okay. All right, so I'm going to put this slide up because really all you need is the information from this one frame to help you with that discussion. Because it looks like I'm watching y'all that every time you try to click on that link, you're blocked. All right, so I'm going to leave this up. You should be able to access the other video, but this one specifically has the equation for photosynthesis. So question number 1, you want CO2 plus H2O plus light yields C6H12O6, which is glucose. And they said stored energy because energy is stored that you've absorbed from the sun. You're stored in that glucose molecule, and oxygen is released back into the atmosphere. All right, so you need to write the equation and then basically discuss how this equation, the parts of this equation equate to the productivity. The one on the bottom is is respiration, but it's photosynthesis in reverse. They didn't ask you for that one. They asked you for the first one. Right, you didn't need this for this particular discussion, but I also want you to be aware of some of the things he talked about as far as gross primary productivity and net primary productivity, and the fact that we're talking energy, and energy is always measured in calories, and in this case, it is measured in kilocalories. When you do chemistry, you'll talk about these units. Calories, you have little calories and you have big calories, or you have calories with a little c and calories with a capital C. And so the calories that you see on your food box is usually the calories with a capital C, but it's really equates to kilocalories. Oh, and as you see, there's a little math involved. So somewhere along the way, expect to see a question that asks you to calculate the productivity. Not on this one, but at some point you'll need to be able to calculate primary productivity, the difference between. So that's an equation you can write down too, that gross productivity minus respiration equals net primary productivity. Again, not needed for this question, but at some point you will need that information. Right, I'm going to stop sharing unless anybody still needs me to leave this up. You need me to leave it up? Type leave it. Okay. Which video? Yeah, that's why I had that picture up. So the picture that I just had up had all the information that you needed from that video. Because for you all, it blocks you. So did you need something else? I can put that picture back up in a second if you need me to. All right, give me 1 second to. Has anybody tried to open the ocean one? Is that blocked for you too? It would be on your playlist. Yeah, I think I just closed it. Yeah, I did just close it, but hold on. Yeah, I do have it muted. All right, I'm going to put this link in the chat for you. That's for the ocean productivity one. That's just good information to have. All right, back to this one. What did you just do? Why does it keep going back to the same one? Okay, not working, not working. Close it, open this, and it's doing the same thing. Oh, I know why it's doing that, because that's what I keep clicking on. Okay, that's not going to, okay, forget that. Let me come back over here, go there. All right, just to wrap up the first part of that question, ask you to write the formula for photosynthesis. The formula for photosynthesis is CO2 plus H2O, that's carbon dioxide plus water, plus light. Light energy is usually from the sun. And that yields a chemical reaction takes place, molecules switch around, and it yields, that's what the arrow means, glucose, which is C6H12O6, and that is the stored form of energy. When we talk about plants make their own food, they make glucose and then they store it so that they can carry out respiration, so that they can get energy to do all the things that a plant needs to do for life. As a waste product, photosynthesis gives off oxygen. Okay, so that is the formula that you need to write, and then you needed to analyze that in terms of what each of those has to do with energy. Okay, all right, so if you have done all you need to do, you've answered your circle of life, and you've answered this question, you're good to go. And I'll see you tomorrow.